Hi, everyone. Deborah Hamilton. And today I'm talking to Mark Momjian of Momjian and Anderer of Pennsylvania. I met Mark as a co speaker at the ABA Family Law Conference in Montreal, Canada. He is such a devotee to animal law, although he's not teaching animal law. He really is teaching other things, but is so respectful of animal law. He teaches at Villanova, he teaches at Drexel, and he is so aware of what animals mean in our life and in the law. So let's hear what Mark and I talked about now. Hi, everyone. It's Deborah Hamilton, and you're at Why Do Pets Matter, the podcast that talks about why pets matter to our guests. Thank you so much for being here. Remember to like, remember to share, because the only way people are going to get to hear this wonderful discussion is if you share it with them. So thanks so much. Today, we are talking to my new but seemingly old friend, Momjian, Mark Momjian of Momjian Ad. I'm sorry, Mark. I am just going to restart the part
That's
because
okay.
my editors will take that out. So I'm just going to say we're speaking today with Mark Momjian of Momjian Editor in Pennsylvania, one of the biggest law firms to do family law in the entire area of Pennsylvania. It was founded in 2010 and is active in one-third of the judicial districts in Pennsylvania. I met Mark because we were introduced by the ABA Family Law to speak together in Montreal. We did speak together a little circuitously because unfortunately Mark contracted COVID before, so he was there on Zoom. And we were in Montreal giving this wonderful program on why pets matter in divorce, something that's near and dear to my heart, but also something that's near and dear to Mark. But he has a much broader experience in all sorts of domestic law and also mental health law. He teaches at Villanova family law, and he also teaches at Drexel in the medical community for the mental health students that are there. So I'm just so thrilled. And we just found out that we have a connection to Rowan University and the Schreiber Therapy Dog Symposium's creator, Mr. Schreiber. So, Mark, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad we finally got time to chat together.
I'm delighted to join you, Deborah.
It's been fun. So we always start with just one question, which is why do pets matter to you, Mark?
Wonderful way to start a program and such food for thought. Um, for me, Deborah, I mark my inspiration uh, for a dad, a father who just adored animals and brought them into our family's um, integral everyday being. And he was an animal law expert at a time when animal law wasn't really taught at law schools. He was an advocate, a humanitarian, and he took on a variety of animal law related cases, which really served as an inspiration to me and my siblings. And I would think that's how it started for us. I mean, we were raised with companion pets, dogs, of course, cats, of course. We had a rabbit. I mean, we would go out frequently, and our dad would constantly comment about animals in our lives and the importance of them. So that's how it probably started as an inspiration to me and my siblings.
It's so interesting because my mother was petrified of animals, but a friend of ours got a German Schnauzer, and so she decided she'd get a German Schnauzer too, and that was my first foray into pets. And then we received an Irish Setter as a Christmas present. My sister did in college, and it came home a little bit different than a German Schnauzer, miniature German Schnauzer. My mother was a little afraid of Treb for the longest time, but then she realized that this was a phenomenal dog. So we have also had dogs and horses and lizards and guinea pigs. My kids grew up like you did. You know, they had an incredible respect for animals, but also the value of animals in what we do in life. So pets matter to you so much. I love the fact that your dad was busy in animal law when there was no animal law. It was law applied to animals, which is
That's
different. And I'd
exactly
love for
right.
you to explain the difference to people because they just think animal law. Well, of course it's animal law. No, there is no real animal law. There is law applied to animals. Maybe there's some coming down the pike now, but at the time your dad was busy, it was law, property applied to animals.
And in many jurisdictions, it still is.
Yeah.
And I know how you feel, Deborah, as a pioneer and trailblazer in this field. I never like to use the word ownership when it comes to companion animals. I don't feel like we're owners. I feel we live with animals, and I feel the first thing we have to do is respect a species of sentient beings that we live with and adore and love. By the way, Deborah, I grew up with two miniature schnauzers, and they were so different in temperament. It was
Yep.
just like almost unbelievable. And I had an Irish setter in my neighbor's backyard, the Rileys. So I know what that's like as well. So that's kind
And
of
they're not like German schnauzers.
they're not. But this Irish setter Terrence was a an everyday presence to the neighborhood when we would play wiffle ball, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful animal. But no, you're right. So Villanova, where I teach family law, I've been lecturing there for 25 years. I've been the family law professor since 2014. Only recently began teaching animal law. And so I incorporate animal law in my family law class when we talk about what happens when you're dealing with family separation. And certainly, try to combine it by bringing Villanova's comfort animal to the law school.
Yeah.
Normally people think that that's for undergraduates, and I say it's for everyone. Okay, graduate students, undergraduates, there's nothing like an animal coming into a classroom that just lowers the blood pressure and just simply calms people down. So our comfort animal is a half golden, half Labrador named Taffy, and every year she comes in and does magic in our class, and it's a big highlight. I'm surprised other professors don't do it, but it's part of our routine every semester.
I love that you bring them in. It's interesting because as you said, family law doesn't necessarily inure someone to think about animal law. And yet, when families break up, that's what we presented on. When families break up, who gets the pet sometimes creates such a schism, right? Because they all know what they're going to do with the chairs and the kids in the house but then when the pet comes, they're like, wait a minute, what do you mean? The pet goes with me. I bought it, or a pet goes with me. I stayed home with it every day. I couldn't think about it. And as you pointed out so beautifully with the law students, having a pet in your life makes going through these difficult situations almost possible.
Oh, I totally agree with you. When I was in law school, I don't know that any of my fellow students were living with an animal while they were going through that first year of law school. Today, it's actually a lot more common. And we know about how important service dogs are, therapy dogs are. We know that graduate school is tension filled, anxiety filled. So it's a very, very different vibe, if you will, when you go to law school and you're living with a pet. At Villanova, I had a student who's now, I think, finishing her first year at Boston University Law School, and she brought her pit bull up from the Philadelphia area to law school. And, I asked her, how are you going to manage it? And she said, it's not an issue. I mean, this is how I live. And we just find a place where I can go back and check on or get a sitter or a walker. And, that's just the life that people are now accustomed to, especially people who live in the city and rely on people to help them when they're in a work situation and they need a visitor. So it's something that's evolving, and I think certainly it relates to a lot of people.
It's interesting because when people say to me, well, why would I want to see Mark ever again? We're getting divorced or we're breaking up and I never want to see him again. And I go, well, you're lucky, especially if you live in a city. Many people pay their rent and heat their
Oh,
homes by dog walking or,
totally,
dog taxi, right? So
totally.
I can send the dog with a trusted dog walker or someone we've established a relationship with as a dog taxi to bring the dog from point A to point B. When you and I were discussing this at ABA, we talked about what you can do to make sure that the pet always has a safety net when it goes to court. And we'll get to it. There are 9 states now that are accepting pets as more than property. Judges are being asked to decide what the decision would be in the best interest. I have my opinion. I can't wait to hear yours. But pets are becoming more like children, especially in divorces of people without children.
There's no question. Um, I think that what we're seeing, evolution of law wise, is very positive. There are people that probably think we should go more quickly. I think the law evolves slowly, generally. But 9 states, compared to where we were 40 years ago when I began practicing as a lawyer, is remarkable. When Pennsylvania decided its first pet custody case or pet property case in the context of a divorce, they likened a dog to a table or a lamp. And the language was so offensive that case, I think, is, if you looked it up on Westlaw or Lexis, probably is cited in over 50 legal journals because the language even gets my hair standing on end today. And yet we do see this evolution that is taking place. You and I discussed this in Montreal, where I do feel that if it works well, it works well for everyone, not just the parents who have split, but the children, where people can do what is best for an animal and the children, and it works. I mean, if someone who says, look, I can take the dog or cat while you're on vacation, it can work. And people just have to think about that in the context of what's best. I wish they did that in every child custody case that we had. But it does seem to me that the large majority of our clients do work it out. Now, when it doesn't work out, and people need either an alternative dispute resolution route or they go to court, it can be costly both financially and emotionally. In Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia Inquirer is covering a case where an unmarried couple are fighting over custody of a cat, and the legal fees have topped $25,000.
Yeah, that's low. I know
Yeah,
that Jeremy Cohen went to an appeal with one of his cases. He has set precedent on if you shared the dog and you decide unilaterally not to share the dog anymore, no, that doesn't work, right? So, and their bills were 50 grand.
yeah. I mean, I've seen it, and it's what we would call a perfect storm in family law. It's the litigants, their will, their pockets, deep or otherwise, the other dynamics that go along with the fighting. We deal with this in child custody all the time, and
But
what
at
we
least
see.
child custody people, I'm sorry to interrupt, but child
Yeah,
custody, there are people to help the parents understand what this is doing to the children. In pet custody, it's still the Wild West.
I think in many states it is. And I think in Pennsylvania, there are judges that don't want to be bothered by it. They simply wave off the litigants and the lawyers and say, go to an arbitrator. This is not important, doesn't rise to the importance of other issues that require adjudication. But it's changing now because just like all the judges have children or grandchildren at a certain age bracket, they all have pets too.
Yeah.
And I know that I've been in courts where judges have taken the lawyers in the back room and said, "Look, I'd like to problem solve with you on this. I'd hate for you to have to go on the record, swear testimony, and deal with this this type of issue because I know how it lingers. It
Yeah.
hurts when you lose a case like this. That's exactly what happened in the instrumental family law case that went up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which declined after accepting the appeal to hear that case. So it does matter, and I think that's why you're seeing 9 states, as you pointed out.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's usually a fight over being right, over getting it right for the pet. And if
Totally.
we can, as you said, maybe get to ADR and teach some ADR professionals, because they're not really versed in how to handle these kind of questions either, because
I think that's right.
it isn't something about who's better to get the dog. It's what can we do to do the best for this animal? I spoke with Matt Cooper, who did the wonderful Travis v. Murray case, which
Mhm.
started the New York State domestic relations law to put something in their legislation so that the pets would have the best interest. He said well-being in his decision, but they did best interest, which of course lawyers can parse words 8 ways from Sunday. They're not the same. And so when I spoke with Judge Cooper, I said to him, so what happens? I said, if you decide, I said, I think we have a no-win situation because if you listen to all the evidence and say, well, Mark is a better home, he bought the dog and he has the money to care for the dog, and he's been with the dog as much as the other party, so I'm going to leave it with Mark. Well, Deborah's going to hate him and be angry. But I said to Judge Cooper, and he stopped and thought, I said, what happens if, as Mark walks out of court that day, he gets hit by a bus? I said, where does the
Well,
dog go?
yeah. Deborah, I can't agree with you more. I've read that opinion multiple times, and the reflection and deliberation of this fact finder that took so much time to get it right. And by the way,
Yep.
I've read multiple decisions from New York Supreme Court
Mhm.
trial court judges that I'm very proud of, actually, even though I'm not licensed to practice in New York. There was a judge recently in Delaware that decided that um, the litigants in a pet dispute would have an auction between the two of them.
Oh God.
Isn't that horrible?
Oh God.
And it made headlines not very long ago. I mean, I think late in the last quarter of last year, and it was so offensive to me. Okay, this idea that we would have an auction, and I think a colleague said, "Yeah, it does sound odd," and I said, "Odd? I mean, would you auction off a child?" Is that how we're going to do it? So, I do think that as the law evolves jurisprudentially, we have to understand that contrast cases like the one Judge Cooper decided versus these other cases, learn from them, talk about good practices to young lawyers. Now, I will say this to you that the lawyers the law students that I've met interested in animal law are interested broadly in social justice. To me, that speaks volumes as to where the law is headed. Social justice is a part of legal education today. Students don't want to go for 3 years and be in a lecture hall. They want to be in clinical settings. They want to say, after 3 years of law school and $300,000 of tuition in some instances, that they did something that affected a person or animal's life.
Yeah.
And I think regardless of the species, that is giving them fulfillment with regard to their next step in the legal career. And I think that's an important way of looking at animal law. When you and I were in Montreal, I mentioned how the University of Toronto is one of the pioneering law schools in animal law. They are truly trend setting when it comes to integrating students and programs that allow for all different types of animal law, not just in the context of divorce and separation, but in the context of animals living at zoos, animals that are inhumanely treated, right? So I do feel that other law schools are following these trends, and deans of law schools are looking at it. I am very proud that Villanova, by the way, has a wonderful new family law professor. And, it is part of growth, and I hope that this trend continues. I would say to you, by the time I retire from the practice of law, I will say that half of the United States, 25 states, will now have the protections that the 9 states currently have.
I loved how you depicted that because when animal law started, it really was just about welfare and abuse. We were really focused on the zoos and the abuse of animals. And now we're recognizing that animals impact the law in so many ways. In real estate law, are you allowed to have your dog in this
Of
building?
course,
You know, Vicious dogs. I know that Richard Rosenthal has created a whole practice under the Lexis theory. Uh, so it's interesting because when you and I were baby lawyers, animal law was really all those, and I say this with all love and affection, vegans, right? They don't eat meat and they want to keep everyone from eating meat and saving the animals and the CAFOs and things. And believe me, there's some incredible work being done in those areas. But now animal law is seeping into everyday law,
there's
divorce
no
law,
question.
real estate law, trust and estate law. I
No
mean, people
question.
people don't realize that they not only have to prepare for their death, if they have a pet, what happens to their pet? No, your children may not take your dog. And they're not going to tell you that because you'll write them out of the will. So once you're dead, there's nothing you can do. But if you have made a plan where, okay, so my son Mark can't take it, but my neighbor Susie, who knows the dog just as well, would love to take it. And if I write that down,
Oh,
that's what's going to happen. But these are the kind of things that are happening in the discussion about living better with animals.
no, I totally agree. I mean, my wife and I have a plan in the unfortunate incident that something would happen to us, and our children are fully aware of what that plan is. And we think it's the responsible way of um, planning, estate planning. And we encourage our friends to do the same. It's obviously not a top priority in people's lives who
Right.
don't,
They
who
don't think about it.
they
They just
don't.
think, yeah. And it's funny because I've had several cases in my office where people got sick and their pets were well-meaning placed because they had like a 1% chance of surviving their septicicity or whatever. And they did. And then their animals were gone. And I don't know, if I survived and I got home and my dog wasn't there, I would be really, why did I survive, right? However, people, unless you give them direction, and I think that death is only one thing you have to prepare for. We have a program where we do 12 different things because now there's so much that can create your inability to keep your pet.
I agree. It again, I do think I like the way you describe it as integrated, right, into these other areas. And certainly part of that uh, is understanding that we live with companion pets and animals, we don't own them. It's
Yeah.
really something that I've been discussing with students for a long time because we know the emotional and financial impact of living with an animal. It can be very expensive. People who are now, as I said this when COVID struck, and so many abuse shelters were closed, a lot of the dependent spouses that we knew did not separate from their abusive boyfriends and husbands because they didn't want to leave
Right.
their pet.
Yep.
It was unreal. They could deal with the violence uh, inflicted on them because they could see it, but the idea that their pet would be in harm's way. So one of the evolutions that you and I have been tracking is how abuse statutes and domestic violence statutes now incorporate animal abuse as a factor in determining whether an injunction is
Or a
necessary,
restraining order, right?
or a
It
restraining
goes,
order.
yeah, it goes to the pet as well as the person because quite frankly, so many people are controlled. And it's not just about dogs and cats. There are people on farms out in rural areas who are living in an abusive situation and they have horses. There is no shelter going to take your horse. So we
That's
really
true.
need to expand our ability to help people get out of difficult situations because you know what? Horses are pretty fragile. They can't really go without. So it's for me, it's something that I work with all the time because to make that plan for your pet, because domestic violence is one of the D's we use because people just don't understand and you need to be there. So on a better note, so you have pets now?
Yes, we have a wonderful golden retriever who's the star of our family. And, it's interesting. When you can relate like that, right? When you can, as a client, I always said I was a music student in college and I studied at the Manhattan School of Music, very unusual for a lawyer. But when I always talk about hearing, listening, right? Even when you're questioning a witness, looking at hearing things like cadence and tempo. Well, when you hear a person talk about their pet
Yeah.
and you really listen closely enough, you pick up so much about that client's individual program, what her needs are, what direction their case needs to go. It changes a dynamic between a client and a prospective client or client when you can relate to how's your animal? Did it come back from the vet? Is everything okay? To how are you? How is that working out for the children when the dog or cat is shifting in a car, going back and forth? Those types of things, the way you relate to people, hugely important. Now, these things are not necessarily taught in law school, right?
And they're sometimes not even intuitive. Some people,
Exactly.
and I will raise my hand that people who don't like pets sometimes are written off as crazy people, and yet, that's okay too, because we have to accommodate. I always tell my friends who have emotional support animals in no pet buildings that they really do have to understand what that means. And what drives me nuts when they get the letter and they get the animal
Sure.
in the building is that they think it's a service animal. And you and I both know
Yeah.
it's not the same.
No, it's
And the
not.
accommodation you receive is in your apartment.
Right.
And if you
Exactly.
want to use the elevator, it is really just common courtesy, but really required to say, "Hey, Mark, is it okay if I get in the elevator with you? Because you might, as a child, have been bitten terribly and have scars that I can't see because you were attacked by a dog and are afraid of a dog in an elevator, especially say the pit bull in an elevator, you might go into anaphylactic shock. Um, so,
Exactly.
so these are the kind of things that we are becoming aware of and respecting. It's sort of, I want to have my dog wherever I want to have my dog, but let me make sure I have my dog in a way that is appropriate for everybody.
Uh,
Allergies are a big thing. I'm sure you've probably heard that a number of times that, some people can't be with animals because
yeah, they're
they
allergic.
yeah, they're allergic. So it's, the law has really come a long way. And being a member of the ABA Animal Law Committee and Women Rainmakers Committee and things, it's been interesting to see how people go, wow, I never thought to do alternative dispute resolution in animal law. And I said, well, if you ever talk about somebody's pet, like you just said, you set this up beautifully, Mark, and we didn't even talk about that. If you talk to somebody about their pet, their whole entire countenance changes.
So totally. We've been dealing in Pennsylvania with something that Pennsylvania family lawyers call Caden's Law, which grew out of a gruesome case in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where a child was killed by her father. And one of the elements in that case was that the father had abused the family dog. And when the mother had filed for protection from domestic violence, she got protection, but not for the daughter. And this was one of the elements of a case where, when we see that type of abuse, where a dog or animal is kicked, not properly fed, physically attacked. These are such obvious warning signs of a beyond a personality disorder, but of a mental health breakdown that
Crisis, right.
requires,
Mhm.
right? And I have to say this, we've seen this happen in cases where, let's say, men have abused their girlfriends in past relationships, and then they get married. And a judge would say, well, I'm not interested in what the father may have done to his ex-girlfriends. I'm just dealing with this current arrangement and just say what he did to your client. And I would say to you, as someone who works with psychiatric residents, I do think it's relevant. I think a history of pathology and of that type of behavior needs to be heard. You still have to have causation, but it's the kind of thing that I think these broader statutes allow. Some judges are going to say, no, that's too remote in time. Other judges are going to say, I'll hear a little bit about it
Or it'll be
subject to
prejudicial.
connection. Well, or prejudicial. And, again, because we have such violence in our world today, and children certainly are not shielded from that with their access to the internet and social media. We have such violence in our politics today. We have more and more domestic violence. I do think that we're going to treat, hopefully, we're going to take more time to learn about what we can do to improve our human lives and our animal lives. I
And
really hope so.
I hope so too. And I think that the um, sprinkling of therapy animals in airports. I saw two at the Newbern Airport in Moorhead, Newbern, North Carolina. Two therapy dogs at the airport. I guess to maybe calm down frightened flyers.
Of
But
course.
if we can create the pheromones maybe that come
Hmm.
with petting a dog. I know that my son, my older son, had a cat and he was getting married and looking for a new house. We said, Mom, can you take the cat? I've never had cats, Mark, never. My husband, I would have had cats. My husband told me he was allergic. But we kept Jane for a month. It turned into 6 months.
Yeah.
And when she left, very funny. I said to my son, she's been with us for 6 months. We've cared for her for 6 months. I think if I took you to court, I could show that I'm a better mother for the cat than you are because you left her here. Because I know all these stories that my clients tell me how people abandon and I go, and he goes, Mom, isn't this what you do for a living to not do something like this? I said, yes. I said, but I know all the tricks. I said, so I can keep Jane because I never realized the purring effect.
Oh, it's it's a miracle. And when you grow up and you have an animal like that who is, we say, the motor's running,
Yeah,
and you hear that purr, and you
it
can
is
just
life-changing.
it is. I totally agree that it is. And again, it's like I said, uh, people will enter into relationships where one party has a companion animal, another party doesn't. There's an acclimation process. But we know that because you and I deal with animals and their relationships with our species every single day. There's not a day that goes on in your life or my life where animals are not at some point in the day the center of what we do.
And
And
impacting you. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, my dad's dream, of course, was to open up his own law office. He worked in a very large law firm with 400 lawyers. To have his animal come to his office. That's what he wanted to do. He said, I could just do that. I could take her for a walk at lunch. She'd have a place to stay. It was an Airedale Terrier that my dad was so in love with that I say this with all my heart. I only saw my dad cry twice in his life. Once when his mother died,
Yeah.
and once when his Airedale Terrier died.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
He was so impacted by the love of that, and he instilled that in us. We obviously feel that way about animals, and I think people that do, one of the things I try to tell people, I was a political science major in college, and I worked on Capitol Hill for a couple of summers, is that politics makes, interesting bedfellows, right? We all know that. Now, as it turns out, when it comes to animal laws and humane laws, you'd be shocked to see the caucuses work together.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing, right? I mean, you see two people who are so opposite. You see Elizabeth Warren and Ted Cruz advocating for a legislation, and then you look at it because the Animal Caucus is one of the largest in the House of Representatives entirely. It's interesting how we can look at that. Now, why don't we translate that level of politics to the betterment of our own species?
Yeah.
That fascinates me just as an observer of politics for 50 years. It really
I
does.
I would love to explore that with you next time. We're coming to the end, but I love that question because it does seem that if you can find a way to, that's why I do alternative dispute resolution, either conflict coaching or to have people be the person their pet thinks they are. And in doing so, they rise to an occasion that they don't even know, in my opinion, they can rise to because, well, yeah, my dog would do this, or my cat would do that, or my parrot, or whatever. And so I sit there and I go, what a great way to help people be their best selves, not by telling them, be a good person, Mark. No, they can really relate to be the person your dog thinks you are.
That's a beautiful way of looking at it, and I'm going to think about that because it's really beautifully said.
Well, we'll come back and chat about that next time, Mark. How can people get in touch with you? Because I know that somebody might have a question for you, and I know you're so generous with your time. So if anybody wanted to ask you more about what you do, how you do it, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, if you just type my name into a normal search engine, the law firm Momjian Anderer will come up. We're based in Philadelphia, but like I said, we have a statewide practice. My email is readily accessible online, and I'm delighted to talk to anyone. People do call and
Because
ask
it might
about.
not be right there on your LinkedIn page or on your page at the practice because we don't necessarily talk about the animals.
Yep. But I get calls, and even if someone really just wants advice,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes that's important as a lawyer. We have an obligation to the public, to serving the public, answering questions, and I'm delighted to do that. Even if it doesn't turn into a representation, we do have an ethical obligation to help people, to direct people, to help them problem solve.
Yeah.
And when it comes to animals, I know you've done this as the center of your practice, and it's inspiring what you do, Deborah. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I'm so glad you were here. We talked about so many things that I never get to talk about because I'm usually talking about vet medicine. So I'm really glad I'm talking about the law. Mark, thank you so much. I can't wait to do this again. Have a great
Delighted.
year. And for everyone who's listening, please remember to kiss your dog, your cat, your bird, your horse for me because why do pets matter? Because they make our lives whole. Take
Bravo.
care.
Thank you.
10 years ago, with my iPhone and a script, I recorded the first episode of the Ultimate Pet Resolution Summit, which chatted with experts about conflicts over animals. Our conversations were intimate, honest, and illustrated how disagreements over animals occur and how those disagreements can reshape people's lives and relationships. In November 2019, I started Why Do Pets Matter, a new podcast that continued these informative discussions. I'm so excited to have you here with me, continuing my exploration into a more meaningful conversation about why pets matter to all of us. My guests and I will share ideas, stories, and experiences straight from the heart, unscripted and holistic. From the bravest moments to the most brokenhearted, we will explore how to resolve disagreements over animals differently. One thing I know for sure is I want to have more meaningful conversations that will help all of us unlock that deeply felt human-animal bond that drives the emotions of conflict.